Hello students, welcome to Careers360. A lot of you students have been wanting to pursue law as a career path, as a profession. And then many questions come in of what kind of students must do law, who should not do law, how do you go about choosing a law college? Assuming you get into a law college, what is it that you must do within the law college to actually get the best out of the law college itself? And most importantly, what do you do as a career path after you pass out of the college? Now, there are many questions that come in when students want to pursue law. There are about 73,000 students who actually appeared for the CLAT examination this year. And then when you get onto the state entrance examinations for law only, just Maharashtra has about 27,000 students who appeared for the 5-year law program. If you take the 3-year law program, it is much bigger, mind you. And that way, many states have their own law examinations too. If you add all those things, you're dealing with about 2 lakh plus students actually wanting to pursue law and possibly appearing for one of the examinations to get into a law college. And there are about 1,500 to 2,000 law colleges which are approved with the Bar Council of India, which actually teach you what law should be. But learning law is beyond the classroom. It's about moot courts, it's about internships, it's about capstone projects, it's about placements, and also the varied opportunities that you have once you finish the course. It can be that you want to be a practicing advocate, or join a consulting company, or start something of your own, or work with an NGO or a CSR activity. It can be anything, or with a policy also for that matter. And there's so many questions that students need understanding. There's so many questions that students need a lot more explanation that we needed to speak to someone who understands law like the back of his hand. And for that, I actually had to reach out to the only person who I personally thought would be able to explain to the students in the language that they want to understand. Professor Raj Kumar, who is the Vice Chancellor, or the founding Vice Chancellor of Jindal Global University. He's done his LLB from Delhi University. And then he moved to Oxford to do his BCL. After that, he moved to Harvard to do his LLM. And then he did his doctorate from the University of Hong Kong. So the kind of qualification that he has and the kind of experience that he has in setting up Jindal Global University for the last 10-12 years, 15 years rather, and how he's established the university as one of the biggest institutions as far as law as a career path is concerned, I needed to go to him. So I actually visited the campus. We visited the campus, understood the moot courts, understood the internships, spoke to many people, and then I actually ended up speaking with Professor Raj Kumar also. And please watch this, because every student who wants to pursue law as a profession, as a career path, needs to listen to this video so that they exactly understand what is it that law means, and what is it that the students must be careful about in terms of choosing the path, whether they should do it or not do it, in terms of choosing the college, of how to go about choosing a college, and also what you must do within the college to maximize your returns in terms of the profession that it is, the kind of career path it is. It can be moot courts, internships, capstone projects, or many other things. And after that, what do you need to understand of the kind of what comes out once you finish the law degree in terms of LLM or in terms of a job or a placement. All these things I asked Professor Raj Kumar, and you must listen to this. This is a must listen thing for every student who is actually wanting to pursue law. Law of late has been emerging as one of the most strongest choices that students are making at this point in time. Who should not do law?
You shouldn't be coming into the study of law with this perceived imagery surrounding the profession or the law itself. You may end up being far more disappointed both in the study of law, but definitely as you enter the legal profession.
Students expect certain lifestyle when they become a lawyer, but the real life thing of a lawyer when they get into the profession is extremely difficult and extremely tough.
If your sole objective is to make money, and a lot of money at a relatively short span of time, law is not for you at all.
What are the 3 things that students must not expect when they get into the career path of law?
There are no shortcuts. There are no easy ways to make a lot of money. Second, you need to develop a greater degree of teamwork. It's not something that you can do alone. Third important aspect is that you need to develop a curiosity.
What is the most important advice that you will give that child when they're thinking or not thinking of getting into law as a profession?
Regardless of however advanced a society is, it will continue to face discrimination, injustice, and other forms that will hurt people. Lawyers have a role to fight those injustices, fight against discrimination, and build an egalitarian society where justice and fairness matter. If you believe that you ought to be part of that role, it's important you carry forward that role through the study of law.
Hi, Professor Raj Kumar. Thank you so much for joining us today. Law of late has been emerging as one of the most strongest choices that students are making at this point in time. Obviously, it's affecting policy, governance, everything that you have in the country. Law is being affected, and more laws are also coming. So to that extent, more students are making a choice of becoming lawyers also. What, in your opinion, should be the primary consideration before a student makes an option or makes a choice that they want to become a lawyer?
Thank you so much, Mahesh. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Mahesh, this was not the case historically, although I must say that at least in the Indian context, our freedom movement was hugely inspired by people who were in the field of law. Mahatma Gandhi was a lawyer, Dr. Rajendra Prasad was a lawyer, Sardar Patel was a lawyer, of course, Dr. Ambedkar was a lawyer, Pandit Nehru was a lawyer. So in many ways in India, our freedom movement was led by lawyers who laid the foundations of a democracy, participated in the constitution making process, and even occupied the first members of the Union Cabinet. Having said that, while that was the case, law did not have the kind of imagination attracting the finest students in India. And so even when somebody like me decided to study law in the 1990s, which is almost more than nearly 50 years since independence, the fact remained that the best and the brightest of Indian students historically would go to medicine, engineering, and do so many other things. And frankly, if they couldn't do anything better, they will end up pursuing the study of law. The remarkable thing about the evolution that we've seen since the time I went to law school and now, and clearly the last several decades, is that some of the best and the brightest of school-leaving students are choosing law as a preferred career. This has a number of reasons. First of all, I think the opening up of Indian economy and expansion of the role of the private sector, including the corporate legal profession, opportunities for lawyers to have a much better standard of living, including higher salaries and higher degrees of opportunities and compensation, including legal practice, all of which has possibly contributed to this newfound interest. It has, of course, gone far further than what we even envisage. I mean, today we have 1,700 law schools and more than 125,000 law students studying in our law schools. But the fact is, it is still a question of a determined choice that a student ends up making, because you know very well, if you compare, let's say, engineering or even NEET numbers, law, despite all of this, is nowhere near. So there is that evolution that has happened.
So you earlier said that many of the students at times make a choice because they don't want to get into engineer or doctors or something like that. Is there some kind of an characteristic of a person of who should not do law? Is there something like that?
Frankly, not at all. I mean, I strongly believe that it is also a question of built awareness and information about it. I would even argue that today, at least at this point of time, law has become the new engineering. It has even become the new humanities and social sciences. A lot of students, or good law schools in particular, don't end up studying law in an isolated manner. Let's say, unlike United States, where law is a postgraduate degree course where you enter into a law school after having studied 4 years of undergraduate program, we have historically adopted the British system where one can study law just after high school, or people like me who ended up studying law after having done an undergraduate degree. Both options are there in our country. I don't believe that there are any prerequisites for the study of law. But more than the prerequisites, there is definitely a question of a mindset that you ought to have, because you shouldn't be coming into the study of law with this perceived imagery surrounding the profession or the law itself, because then you will end up studying law, but you may end up being far more disappointed both in the study of law, but definitely as you enter the legal profession.
So would you say that there is a certain kind of person who thrives in the legal profession as compared to something else?
Oh, absolutely. I think, the people who have, and there are many reasons why these things shape their views and attitudes, but those who have developed some degree of a sense of justice, those who want to, let's say, at the heart of what a lawyer does, or people in the field of law who do, is that they want to help other people. They want to make the world a better place. They were deeply invested in the idea of fighting discrimination, fighting injustices, different forms and manifestations. But the heart of why, let's say, a person ends up studying law. And by the way, it's not confined to being a litigator or a general counsel or even a corporate lawyer. Regardless of whichever part of law you choose, you ought to believe in that sense of justice, or your ability to use your legal knowledge to ensure fairness in whatever you do. Those people who have that aspiration tend to do well. Secondly, I think law expects you to develop an analytical mind. Your ability to think about issues and reflect about them is a good skill set to have, and those people who have developed that early on tend to do much better. The third aspect is that if you have an ability to think critically and develop a critical mind, where in many ways whatever is told to you or whatever you are informed, be it through a newspaper or an article or by somebody teaching you or telling you, if you're prepared to challenge that perspective, if you're not prepared to accept views that are given to you on the face of it, but are ready to sort of argue about it, you tend to do better, because that comes with the legal terrain. In all of this, those who are having a greater sense of mindfulness tend to do much better in law rather than people who kind of adopt a more, let's say, if knowledge is given, perspectives are shared, you assume that they ought to be correct.
Typically in India, people who do law are people who are not the STEM students. They typically go through that engineering or doctor kind of a pathway, right? Is there a space for STEM students to pursue law and actually make a difference by using the profession?
So I have news for you. I studied in the Campus Law Center, Faculty of Law, University of Delhi during 94-97. Most of my classmates, including me, had come from a background which is not in STEM, especially both in high school and undergrad. Today, in our law school, and I believe law schools around the country, most of them, at least the good ones, more than 50% of our incoming law students, and maybe even 70%, are students who come from STEM background when it comes to high school. There has been a tectonic shift in the mindset of students who are entering. In fact, a large number of students who have studied maths, physics, chemistry, botany, zoology, and classic, hard sciences in their high school have actually chosen to come into law. Now, this is a serious matter that needs greater introspection. Why are they not becoming, let's say, doctors and engineers and are not entering to hard sciences? But undoubtedly, this dichotomy that used to prevail when it comes to the choices that humanities and social sciences and liberal arts people end up studying law, and the others who come from science backgrounds in the high school end up going. In fact, even in our 3LB, a large number of students have actually come from backgrounds which are not in humanities, social sciences, although the high school proportionate is more significant, because they are looking at law for all the reasons that we discussed earlier, which is about developing a critical mind, an analytical mind.
So, Professor Raj, much of the STEM students, when you look at them, or professional programs, when you look at it, can be BTech or MBBS or law or any of those kind of things. There is a common perception that for other professions, there is a lot of hands-on skilling and training that is happening. It can be being an engineer or being a doctor. Whereas the perception as far as law is concerned is it's typically confined to a classroom. Can you tell the students of what all you do beyond the classroom that makes them understand the rigors of pursuing a law as a career path?
Yeah, no, it's a very important question. I think first and foremost is that the development of new generation of, let's say, universities, even law schools, the idea of a university space where you are not only studying but actually living, and living through your education experience, is one of the most important differences that we pursue here, and I'm sure in other places too, which is that students end up living in a community. They end up learning from those lived experiences that transcend classroom experience. The second is that a lot of peer group learning happens, especially when you are with, let's say, intelligent, smart, and thoughtful individuals surrounding yourself. And that is also an important part of learning, and that's clearly outside the classroom. The third, which I think is we are very unique, is that people don't realize that the idea of a standalone law school, a standalone law university, is hugely problematic, with all due respect to all those institutions which have those standalone institutions. I strongly believe that law is such a hugely interdisciplinary discipline, meaning that it draws so much from history, political science, anthropology, philosophy, sociology, economics, literature, and many more. So the fact that you have high school students entering into a 5-year program with little or no opportunity to interact with students from other disciplines in a standalone, exclusive law university is hugely problematic from a pedagogical standpoint. Fortunately, we have 11 other schools in addition to the law school. Students get to interact with students from other disciplines, but that doesn't stop there. We are again very fortunate because of the presence of these 12 different schools. We offer more than 500 cross-listed electives every day from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. and regardless of whichever school or program a student is part of, he or she gets to be in it. So literally, our law students can take a course on design in our design and architecture school. Our law students can take a course in the business school. Our law students can take a course in our public policy school, just as students from those schools can take courses out of in the cross-listed electives. Now, this alone has created a completely different environment for engagement that transcends. And of course, I also want to add that the point about transcending classroom experiences, we have number of lectures, conferences, workshops, seminars, which makes the space intellectual and the engaging. People come from outside the campus, be it representing the judiciary, the litigation, the corporate legal world, the general counsel world, non-governmental organizations, think tanks, research institutions, international judges. This ends up creating an opportunity for students to learn beyond the classroom. I must also say that university spaces are also about character development, and that includes sports, extracurricular activities, including music and theatre and dance and drama, all of which creates an opportunity for students to engage in it, besides a world-class sports academy that we have, which also contributes to that.
Just to, two things that I wanted to focus on, Professor Raj, is the moot courts and internships, because one of the things when I talked of outside the classroom is the kind of moot courts that it's not just learning in the classroom, but beyond that in terms of drafting something, arguing something, researching and then arguing so that you win the case. So can you explain how a good college will work on the moot court and the kind of process that creates that entire moot court opportunity?
So I must tell you this, for the last maybe nearly 2 decades, law schools have been promoting the idea of mooting, where students are engaged in lots of moot courts, and almost all students who are good students, let's say, have a bullet point in their CV that they did this moot. When we conceived the idea of developing mooting and mooting programs in our campus, we looked at it from a broader advocacy program, from a wider set of dispute resolution framework. So the building that we are in, it's called Imandar, which essentially means that it's an international mooting academy for arbitration, dispute resolution, negotiation, and all of that here. In many ways, not only we have the world's largest moot court here, which is called the Nyayabhyasa Mandapam, the Grand Moot Court, which is a 630-seated moot court with a 13-judge bench. We also have an arbitration center, a mediation center, a negotiation center, and lawyers' chambers. In many ways, we want to take the experiential learning opportunity for students seriously, so that they don't end up thinking that mooting and advocacy is limited to standing up in a court of law. Although that is, of course, a part of it. We just hosted the national rounds of the Jessup Moot Court, and on 29th and 30th November, we hosted a 13-judge bench of the sitting Chief Justice of India, along with 16 other Supreme Court judges, and the Attorney General and the Solicitor General, and Dr. Abhishek Singhvi and Mr. Siddharth Luthra, literally enacting one of India's leading cases, the Keshwant Bharati case, where the basic structure doctrine was introduced. In a way, I want to say that opportunities to elevate a student from their learning experience to the lived experience of law is what mooting and advocacy programs do, and that's what we're doing here.
So, you spoke about all the judges who came here for the moot court and everything. Is there an advantage that location plays in terms of the choice of the college that the student makes?
Yeah, well, I would like to say it doesn't, but unfortunately it does. In fact, this is one of the tragedies of any institution anywhere in the world. Sometimes people don't realize, in real estate, people say there are 3 things important, which is location, location, location. It's no different from institutions too. Proximity to a larger city with access to individuals coming and going makes a huge difference. I mean, I must say that we are very fortunate that we are just less than an hour from Delhi. If we were 4 hours from Delhi, the things that we are trying to do, and that is not necessarily due to I have a lot of respect for institutions which are around the country, and they may not be, and some of them may not be in a big capital city nearby, and they find it even more difficult. I mean, these type of activities become a once a year kind of an experience. It's not that they have proximity to places. So undoubtedly, location makes a huge difference.
And coming back to the kind of gap that is there between what the student believes should be the way forward in terms of their expectation. You know, they're all of them at some point in time are influenced by the aspiration that's created by video or moving camera and whatever, right? So they do expect certain lifestyle when they become a lawyer, but the real life thing of a lawyer when they get into the profession is extremely difficult and extremely tough. Yeah. Can you put that real context in realistic terms so that students understand the expectation?
You're so right, Mahesh. That's why I brought in the idea of public service. In some ways, I tell the young people who I talk around the country, I've given now more than 15,000 talks across India, and I talk to young people across India. And I always tell something that if your sole objective is to make money and a lot of money and at a relatively short span of time, law is not for you at all. You may be making money in law, but if that is your objective, you should undoubtedly enter into investment banking, consulting, venture capital, become a sort of CEO and enter into those manufacturing services sector. If your goal, at least part of it, is about helping people, fighting injustice, contributing to building a just society, engaging in using law as an instrument of social change, strengthening our democratic institutions, being part of an effort to strengthen our constitutional values, regardless of whether you choose that path in the corporate sector or otherwise, if your objective or some part of your liking is towards this, then you will also make money and will end up being more satisfied about your contribution in the law. In a way, it will be a huge mistake for people to glamorize the legal profession on account of what they end up seeing in television and in movies. While part of it can be true in some context, that is not the only thing that should not at least influence their sole reason for entering into the study of law. And besides, the fact that law also requires a very high degree of discipline, constant learning, constant updating of your knowledge, and you're mostly spending your late evenings and weekends, literally becoming familiar. I mean, you look at lawyers and judges, good lawyers and let's say committed and responsible judges, they don't have any weekends because they have to be ready. And that's on the litigation side, where they have to appear in a court of law on a Monday morning. So they are actually preparing through, and they've just had a long week till Friday. In the corporate side, they don't mostly have weekends or sometimes even late nights too. So basically, law in any form is a demanding profession. Let students be very clear that this is not, you don't take this lightly, and it has to be understood from the very beginning.
Yeah, fantastic, because it's very important for students to understand that a legal profession doesn't give you any space for yourself in a certain sense, because you're arguing till 5 in the evening, then going back, resting for a couple of hours, then your clients come in for the next day morning briefings. And next day morning also, again, the briefings take over.
So basically, you have to pursue it as a calling. It's a tapasya. If you're not ready for pursuing law and legal profession as a calling and pursue it as a tapasya, you're not fit for it. And might as well know it in advance before you go through the process.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing, Professor Raj, is the internship. Obviously, we all know that internship is so crucial for a student to become a successful lawyer. If you don't intern well, then it's very difficult for you to break the barrier at some point in time. But the colleges are not mandated to provide internship. That's the law at this point in time. So in that context, what is your take on the responsibility of colleges to take internships? And how does a student know that the internships are provided or not provided?
This is a matter where I've done some thinking, but also possibly a little bit of a controversial view. That, when you look at our own schooling and college, most of my life at least, I never did any internship. I had fun, I had space for myself, I enjoyed, I played, I did lots of things. I even spent time somewhat idle in that sense. That kind of gave a lot of space for thinking. What I'm really worried about this whole internship model that we have created is that many students, I'm not saying all, many students across, and not just law but other disciplines, are happily undertaking at a very young age, even high school by the way, 2-week internships in law firms, investment banks, consulting firms, and are putting it as a dot in their CV. And they do multiple internships, 2 weeks each, in multiple organizations. In a way, I am all in favor of internships, but we should move towards a more substantive internship experience. The only way we can have substantive internship experience is that we should discourage any internship experience which is not less than 4 weeks, ideally 6 weeks. Now, the problem with that model, which is the ideal situation, is universities need to restructure their entire schedule. In fact, when we began our university in the year 2009, including the law school, we had a much shorter winter break, and we would, of course, like everybody else, try to do a lot during that semester. But we worked hard to now create almost a 6 to 8 weeks winter break and a full 8 week summer break, which essentially means that we have 8 months of teaching and 4 months available for students to pursue substantive internship program, immersion program, study abroad program, and other such opportunities. The reason this becomes important is that it takes that degree of effort to actually learn. Then the second part of internship is that good schools or law schools should actually develop an internship mapping experience. What is happening today? You're a first year student. You have not even studied law significantly. You are introduced into some degree of humanities. You have some contacts and network. You ended up landing in a major corporate law firm. You're a first year student. You don't know anything about law in that sense. You are in a law firm. Now think about it. Law firms are professional organizations which have real clients who are paying a lot of money to do work. Now there are some degree of obligations that they need to have, for which you've got an internship. You essentially are doing photocopying. Basically, the internship is about how effectively you can use a photocopy machine, or to sit in meetings, and even taking minutes is a bigger effort, and most of the time confidential meetings you are not even allowed. In a way, what I want to say is that students and institutions should be circumspect about internships. They need to take the internship experience seriously. You need to develop a mapping process whereby if you are a student of law, let's say the first 2 years or so, you shouldn't be doing serious internship in law-based organizations. You should start with think tanks and research institutions and probably even NGOs, even engage in some field experiences, even let's say shadowing in courts and observing what's happening. As you proceed in the journey towards the latter part of your learning experience, you can actually get into, let's say, a law firm or an in-house counsel office, or work with a litigator. And then towards the highest level in which you have reached in terms of your learning and experience, you can clerk with a judge and be part of it. Unfortunately, most of the time, this is not happening. A lot of effort is being put to get these internships. The downside of it is that internships are not being taken seriously when you put it in the CV, even by employers, because they know that this is not real. It is just a dot in the CV. So we need to take internship, but the law schools ought to take responsibility. The second thing which I think is unique about law, and like say other disciplines, that it's important that students spend time in observing and learning, not all of which is about doing. So the idea of a mentorship, especially in the field of litigation or even other areas of law, is so critical that you are observing and learning before you end up actually doing. In many ways, if you look at the classic approach to learning medicine, for example, you would have found that the doctor is even interacting with the patient. There are students of medicine standing around the doctor, and even the part of discussion between the doctor and the patient is part of a learning experience. They are not doing surgeries, but that part of learning is so critical. Unfortunately, in the world in which we are living increasingly, the kind of demands and expectations of students of law to do all these things so early on and somehow jump those steps to be able to get whatever they want to do is actually undermining their ability to learn effectively.
No, I completely agree with you. The same thing holds good for doctors also, because they just are made to go on the rounds without learning much. And some of these colleges have now become teaching shops than making the doctors learn. Just to talk about, you are inferring about the mindfulness and empathy and all. How law is a different profession, Professor Raj. It is not another profession where you're trying to be there because you want to earn some money. There's larger purpose to the whole thing, because ultimately we're talking of a judicial system, a justice system that these people would be a part of it over a period of time. What role does an institution play in character building so that the right kind of people with the right ethos come out and actually partake in that entire?
It's absolutely a phenomenal question. I think one of the things that an institution ought to foster within the culture of the institution and indeed the mindset of students is to develop a respect for the rule of law. I think we are increasingly living in a world, both domestically and internationally, that the idea of the rule of law is undermined constantly. And of course, when people commit those violations, they end up committing with impunity. And so there is a real threat of students actually end up thinking that law is a facade and that real thing is about figuring out how you will circumvent the law and you will avoid the consequences of not following the law. So a lot of effort ought to be to instill the faith in the idea of the rule of law, and that will require both philosophy and history and sociology and political science integrated into the study of law. I also think it's important for us to have conversations where there have been cases and lived experiences where law and justice has won and where law and justice did not win. I think it's important for the students to appreciate the challenge of being committed to the rule of law, because one cannot assume that it will always be the case. And that requires a more candid and a more diversified environment in which such conversations happen. The third, I think it's absolutely critical for students to have mentorship. In many a time, what happens is that classroom alone cannot fulfill this purpose. A more one-on-one interaction with students, especially by faculty, including the research centers and the institutes that a good university should have and a good law school should have, those opportunities provide students to have a more, let's say, dialogic experience with the faculty members. I believe that makes a huge difference, because ultimately these are impressionable minds. And I think we have to make a pedagogical distinction between postgraduate students, doctoral students who are pursuing law or any other discipline, as opposed to a high school student who simply landed up in a law school just after 12th standard. A vast difference exists in terms of their attitude, their worldview, their lived experience, their perspectives, and that's where institutions have a greater responsibility.
It's a very important point that you brought in, Professor Raj, which is about a student making a choice after graduation versus a student who is making a choice after class 12th. What, in your opinion, is the right format for this? Do you think a student who's finished graduation must make the choice after graduation? Or do you think that, at class 12th level itself, a student can decide that they want to be a lawyer and then work on it?
So, I think this is a very, very important question, because I have seen through the system, meaning that I was part of a 3-year law program, and by that time the idea of 5-year law schools had already emerged. I must say that I would have argued in favor of a 3-year law program any day, for only one important reason, which is that I expect the students who come into the study of law some degree of maturity, lived experience, and even worldview and all of that. And unfortunately, and that is because the typical law school in India, even the best of the law school, suffer from the so-called law university problem, which is far too emphasis on the study of law and doctrinal law, including legal provisions and law subjects. The advantage of a person, let's say somebody like me or many others who have come into law after having done an undergraduate program in any discipline, including doctors and engineers who have come into law, is that they have got some degree of lived experiences. They have got an opportunity to learn and to experience the life of being as a student in a university. That experience, that informed understanding of what an institution of higher learning is all about, how they had transcended from a school to a college or a university, can actually bring that experience into a classroom in a law school much better. But for that to happen in a 5-year law program, it's important that the institution takes responsibility to take their humanities seriously, take their social sciences subject seriously. In fact, I've had conversations with the students in different parts of the country, that law students in particular, that we're just going through all these humanities and are waiting for the real thing, which is the law. But that's a very, very flawed perspective. You really need to have foundations in humanities and social sciences so that you understand the law, because as we know, law is built in a social context. You cannot isolate the society from law, and that is why it's important for us to give them a holistic approach towards learning. So 5-year or 3-year is a choice that they make, but if they choose to go into a 5-year program, they should be conscious of the fact that they need to do a much broader understanding of law and its as a social institution to be able to get the full benefit of what legal education is all about.
So do you think the institutions also need to play a role in terms of imbibing the spirit of social justice and equity and fairness amongst the students?
So undoubtedly, Mahesh, I think this is so important, because I cannot do better than draw your attention to a phenomenal book by a Harvard-based political and moral philosopher, Michael Sandel. The title of the book, which he wrote almost a decade ago, is called "What Money Can't Buy: The Moral Limits of Markets," where Michael argues about the fact that by an overemphasis on money, we have increasingly become a society where everything that we do is measured in monetary terms. And the outcome of such a society, where he makes a distinction between a market economy and a market society, and he's in favor of a market economy, but a market society essentially creates an environment where not only everything that is measured in monetary terms, but almost recognizes that something that is of not monetary value is not worthy of pursuing. So he argues that there ought to be something that money can't buy, then there ought to be moral limits on markets. So when it comes to law, law is supposed to be the guardian of a society. Law should create an environment where justice can be served. And if law and justice are not served, we not only risk of undermining society, but also risk of undermining democracy and democratic institutions. For a country like India, for 200 years of colonialism, we fought and we created a constitution for us. The foundations of our republic is based upon a constitution that we wrote for ourselves, where we are here today, where we have India's first constitution museum. It's important for law students to be mindful of that context as they look at it.
Yeah. Also, there is this perception, and maybe it's born by the on-the-ground reality also, that lawyers who got their parents also being lawyers. So we're talking of the legacy that's being continued because you actually have a family which is into law, versus first generation lawyers. And the first generation lawyers obviously go through a lot of stress and journey before they even create something of their own. So can you explain this part of it, of how difficult it is to be a first generation lawyer and the reality that they must expect when they hit the ground running?
So again, I have good news for you. 25 years ago, when I was a student in Delhi University, more than 50-60% of my classmates had direct legal background. Some of them have very strong background, including fathers and grandfathers and parents and family members so closely. Later, now, and I can tell you about the incoming class, more than 50-60% of our students have no direct family background in the field of law. And it's not only we are an exception, I'm sure that could be the case with what has happened is that because of the prestige and reputation that law as a career and as a profession has acquired over the years, new generation of students whose parents may be doctors, engineers, chartered accountants, and pretty much everything else, they are coming into the study of law. This is also connected to the democratization of legal profession, where not only law graduates can pursue the study of law and enter into legal profession in the form of litigation, but they can also do so many other things in the law. and that has also contributed towards the expansion. And today we are in a much better position than what we were, exactly what you said, 3 decades ago.
And what are the 3 things that you will do if you were to choose a college for your own child? What are the 3 things that you look for when you're choosing a college where to pursue law as a profession?
So the first and foremost is universal. I would like to check about the qualifications and experience of faculty. Universities are all about outstanding faculty, their ability to, their reputation, and their research outputs and their research publications. That's the first thing. Second, I would not have said this 25 years ago. I will look at the global engagement. To what extent the institution has been able to provide opportunities for students, and to what extent it's internationally connected, because now more than ever before, graduates are going to be doing transnational work, international work, even if they practice here. The third aspect, which I think is so important, is that to what extent the institution is favoring interdisciplinary learning, whereby new areas such as artificial intelligence, technology, intellectual property rights, cybercrime, those are all at the cusp of interdisciplinary learning in the field of law. To what extent the institution has both the bandwidth and the capability to contribute towards interdisciplinary learning is the third factor that I'll keep in mind when students make a choice to pursue law in any particular institution.
It's very interesting you talked of international, because I agree with you that increasingly you're not dealing with only Indian laws. You are actually trying to interpret international laws, because you will have a clientele which is coming across the thing, right? How important is studying beyond your LLB in terms of LLM or doing an international practice? How important is that? And do you see that as a very important pathway to really succeed as a lawyer?
It's a great question. I mean, historically, it was not the case. But if I look at the current trends and situations that we are seeing, a large number of bright law students are increasingly making a choice to pursue a master's degree abroad. Part of the reason also means that when you study, so law is a terminal degree, which essentially means that you can become the Chief Justice of India, accepting the academic world. Everything in law you can do with a 5-year law or a 3-year LLB program. So you don't need to do that to just get a promotion in your career. But people still do it because most of the time in your legal education, you are introduced to courses for the first time. You don't have the time and the context to pursue specialization and more deeper learning surrounding those areas. So the reason to pursue the master's degree program should not be a routine reason. It should be that you want to immerse yourself into a more specialized field of law, so that the understanding of that field will possibly help you to pursue your own profession better, or you have a deeper sense of intellectual curiosity to pursue a master's degree. And the third obvious reason is that, which is the case with many students, and we are very fortunate that some of them have come here, is that if you want to enter into legal academia, then the pursuit of a master's and then possibly a PhD program is also a choice. In a way, you don't take that decision to pursue a master's degree in a lighter manner. You ought to have a real substantive reason to do that, because you are spending precious time out of your time in the legal profession to be away to do that, and that should not be a flippant decision.
See, one of the things that students, and we are trying to set up a realistic expectation of the student. What are the 3 things that students must not expect when they get into the career path of law?
First and foremost, there are no shortcuts. There are no easy ways to make a lot of money. And there is simply no way to, get quick results. Law as a discipline requires extraordinary discipline, determination, dedication over long years of serious, working and literally getting the mastery of law. Second, I think is very, very important is that you need to develop a greater degree of teamwork, regardless of whether you are working in corporate sector or in litigation. You are working with many more people than one person. It's not something that you can do alone. So this is whether it's preparation in mooting or in other types of projects. Medicine is a good example. People do projects together. There are, in some areas of business also it's the case. Law students need to understand that they need to work together in teams. and that is something that they need to have that feeling that you can't do it alone. I think the third important aspect is that you need to develop a curiosity. Developing and having a curious mind is so important because most of the time we are told that this is the law, but you should be prepared to think that if this is the law, is this right? Should this be challenged? Are there other ways to interpret this law? Can an alternative view can be created surrounding it? Every major development in the country, including the largest national flag that you see in this campus, which Mr. Naveen Jindal fought, and we had two major cases, one with the Delhi High Court and finally the Supreme Court, is an example of changing the law and reforming the law and reimagining the law. Students ought to develop that mindset, and that will happen if you have an intellectual curiosity.
Professor Raj, last question from me. There is a student watching you on the other side, 16 to 18-year-old. What is the most important advice that you will give that child of when they're thinking or not thinking of getting into law as a profession?
Well, all I can say is that never before in the history of India, a law has been so important than now, because almost every aspect of our life is today governed by law. There is not a single aspect of our life, regardless of whichever aspect of life, is not governed by law. So you need to take law seriously. The second aspect is that today there is so much of talk about artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, and the role of technology in shaping our future. I strongly believe that none of this is possible without we in a position to have a legal infrastructure, a legal framework to ensure that issues relating to compliance, ethics, and the governance of AI is focused on. And who do you think will be able to write the regulations surrounding that? And that will be lawyers. The third is that we are increasingly living in a time when there are new forms of crimes emerging, and technology itself could be a potential framework for crime. And that also means that the traditional areas of law, including crimes that are committed, including serious crimes, require new ways of engaging with those crimes, including creating a legal architecture, an enforcement machinery, and strengthening the legal framework. All of that will be led by lawyers. Fourth, it's important for you to recognize that democracies are created and strengthened by the rule of law and justice system. Our constitution has provided a framework for us 75 years ago. If we need to preserve that framework, it is the role of lawyers who, just as they led the freedom movement and were involved in the creation of our constitution, they ought to be involved in ensuring that our democratic institutions are strengthened and our democracy is preserved. And the last thing is that regardless of however advanced a society is, it will continue to face discrimination, injustice, and other forms that will hurt people. Lawyers have a role to fight those injustices, fight against discrimination, and build an egalitarian society where justice and fairness matter. If you believe that you ought to be part of that role, it's important you carry forward that role through the study of law.
Thank you so much, students. One of the things that I always wanted to talk is about the importance of law as a profession, as a career path, because it's not just about making money, it's not about winning cases, but it's about doing it the right way for the right people. Justice, fairness, equity, all these are extremely, extremely important for people like us. So when you're choosing law as a profession, if you're choosing law as a profession, remember, this is not a easy route for success. If you're a first generation lawyer, it might be much, much more difficult. But very important for you to understand that if you stand for justice, for fairness, for equity, then law gives you a lot of fulfillment, a lot of satisfaction. While over a period of time, if you continue the journey for a couple of decades, you will also make a lot of money. But importantly, initially it might be a tough ask, but it will give you a lot of satisfaction, a lot of fulfillment, because you deliver justice for people who are underprivileged, underserved, and that is what makes this profession a very, very good profession for you to get in. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank you.